did it on my.
Okay, I'll do it. You looking at Zoom?
I am getting there yet.
Wait till we're live. Okay. So Scott said.
It's working.
It is, we are live.
We are live. Okay, good morning, folks. It is 8:32, August 19th. Call the meeting to order. And welcome everybody. It's been a while since we've had an in-person meeting. First one for Nathan Douglas. It is. We went virtual when it was his fault. Okay. Is it your first one? Oh.
My first one too.
Wow. Well, okay, so can I get Cassandra, would you call the roll, please?
Jenny Moore,
Here.
Pilar Rodriguez,
Here.
Courtney Bexel,
Here.
Nathan Douglas,
Here.
Matt Gray,
Here.
Ed Keenan, Jerry Romero,
Here.
Rodney Riley,
Here.
Stephanie Wagner. Madam Chair, 7 board members are present and 2 are absent.
We do have a quorum. Thank you, Cassandra, appreciate it. Invitation for public comment. We have none. Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 3. Approval of minutes for August 11th. Did everyone have a chance to look over the agenda or the minutes from the last meeting?
I have Madam Chair, and I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Motion by Matt Glaze to approve the minutes from August 11th meeting, second by Jerry Romero. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So say you, motion carries. Number 4, agenda item number 4. Somebody's coming on. Investment consultant report on investment performance, asset allocation, and investment policy. This is an action item. I want to introduce John Brett, for those of you that have never seen him in person. This is our investment guide. If you would, sir, please introduce yourself and you have a.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much. It's great to see everyone in person. Hopefully everyone online can hear me okay. My name is John Brett. I'm a senior consultant at the ANCO Consulting. We were hired a little 4 years ago by the system. So we are the non-discretionary investment advisor for the system, obviously, up on asset allocation, manager search and selection, and then on top of that, performance reporting. So today, we are going to recap the results for the plan through June 30, 2021. I also have an update on the plan through July, which proved to not be overly significant in terms of return, but obviously we're closing in on the end of our fiscal year, so we'll touch on those results as well. So what I'd like to do is focus everyone's attention on the investment performance review for the period ending June 30, 2021. This is the version that has a kind of blue font on the front of the document. So I'm going to start with page number 3, which kind of does a good job of really recapping the overall performance of the markets within the second quarter of the year. And if you focus on the top right of page number 3, what you'll see is what we're trying to show here is on top, performance of domestic equity, in the middle, performance of international or non-U.S. equities, and then down at the bottom, performance of the bond market. And really the second quarter was kind of characterized by what I would say kind of ongoing equity market enthusiasm. We've obviously kind of continued to have the rollout of vaccines. We had fairly steady reopenings of economies throughout the United States during the second quarter, and that really all pushed helped, or really all helped, to push stock markets higher during the quarter. Obviously, in Q3, we've had more fears over this rise of the Delta variant, and whether or not that's going to kind of upset kind of the overall economic recovery. But at least during the second quarter, this led to really strong overall market returns. I would say the one thing that we did see that changed a little bit was kind of market leadership. So in the fourth quarter of 2020, first quarter of 2021, you had really U.S. market leadership coming out of the smaller cap area of the U.S. market. And that's fairly typical coming out of a recessionary period like we experienced in the first half of 2020. Small cap stocks tend to lead the way out. They were also propelled forward by that news of the vaccine around the election, kind of this whole reopening trade, as they called it. But this quarter, you saw them kind of hand back leadership to the large cap stock world, and especially large cap growth stocks. I think a lot of that was tied to comments that the Federal Reserve made through the second quarter, which was they were not in any big hurry to raise interest rates. Their original indication coming out of the pandemic was that they were going to wait until probably 2024 to raise rates. Some of the signals that we had seen during the second quarter of higher inflation led investors to question whether or not they really would wait that long. And by and large, what the Federal Reserve was communicating was that they were not in a hurry to try and react to this inflation. They were willing to let it run a little bit higher than maybe we had historically seen it. And so that ended up kind of calming markets, and that really set the stage for growth strategies to outperform a bit. Outside the U.S., you saw good, strong returns, up about 5.5%. I would say when you do that comparison, the 5.5% return for non-U.S. stocks to the 8.5% of the S&P 500. I would attribute a lot of that to the slower vaccine rollout that we've seen internationally. Now, that's what we had seen. We've certainly seen a pretty dramatic pickup, especially in areas like Europe, where you had hardly any vaccinations at the start of the second quarter. And that propelled much higher to, I think, roughly 50% of the European population had at least one vaccine shot at the end of the second quarter. Alongside all that, we did see interest rates coming down. So after the pretty precipitous rise in interest rates of Q4 and Q1, interest rates broadly started to decline during the second quarter. And I think a lot of that was in response to the Federal Reserve kind of affirming that they weren't in a big hurry to take any moves on interest rates. Not surprisingly, areas of the fixed income market that tend to be a little bit more interest rate sensitive performed really well. That would be government bonds and corporate bonds. And then we also saw good performance out of the TIPS market, or Treasury inflation protected securities. In the kind of quarter where we're seeing indications of inflation of kind of 4 to 5%, it's not surprising that inflation protected securities are going to hold up pretty well in that environment. That's really what we saw during the second quarter. If you flip forward a page to page number 4, just looking at kind of the style chart, and I think the biggest thing here that we see is this is a little bit more kind of familiar to what we were seeing in 2019, early 2020. We kind of that really persistent outperformance of growth stocks relative to value. I think one of the things that was impactful for growth stocks this quarter was the fact that those interest rates did come down. And as interest rates are coming down, that makes some of those kind of long life projects, for like an Amazon or a Microsoft, worth a little bit more in today's dollars when you use a discount mechanism. With interest rates climbing, those future cash flows weren't as valuable, and so that kind of created that environment that was maybe a little bit more beneficial to value-oriented investors as opposed to growth-oriented investors. But again, it was really that month of June where we saw this switch to growth outperforming. It was pretty dramatic. We actually saw that carry forward into the month of July. On page 5, I think the most interesting thing in terms of sector performance was that it wasn't as much of kind of an all or nothing this quarter. The last few quarters we've seen areas like materials, energy, the really heavy commodity-oriented cyclical sectors leading the market. This quarter you saw a little bit broader leadership with energy that's still performing very well, but also kind of matched by technology and even real estate. Energy obviously continues to benefit from the price of oil that was going up. So during the second quarter, oil went up about 25%. That creates a clear tailwind to energy investors. For technology, obviously they benefited from that rotation back towards growth we saw late in the quarter. And then with real estate real estate tends to trade kind of like a bond, which means as interest rates come down, REITs tend to appreciate in value. And I think a lot of that is due to REITs really being focused on dividends, dividend production. So as interest rates come down, their dividends get even more competitive with the overall market. On page 6, just a couple things that I would note when you're looking at stocks out there that are really performing well. In the top left, when you look at the Russell 1000, it's kind of back to those traditional mega cap growth stocks doing well throughout the quarter. The same ones we've talked about for 2-3 years now: Amazon, Apple, Microsoft. Down at the bottom, you see a company, NVIDIA, having a really strong quarter, up almost 50%. NVIDIA is a pretty big player within the semiconductor market. One thing that we're seeing a lot about, there's a headline today that Toyota is going to have to end up cutting production because of the chip shortage that they're facing. So again, anyone kind of involved in kind of that chip making ecosystem, so to speak, really has flourished in what's been a tighter supply environment. NVIDIA is a pretty good example of that. The other thing I would point out is on the right-hand side. So within small cap land, it's certainly been a tougher environment for active managers. In the first quarter this year, they were kind of dealing with the GameStop mania. This quarter, it was the AMC Entertainment mania. And typically what you're seeing is these stocks that are relatively small pieces of this Russell 2000 index kind of get a lot of this retail investor enthusiasm behind them. They bid up the price, and all of a sudden it becomes the largest stock in the Russell 2000. I think the hardest thing, as your trustees and you're evaluating performance of managers, obviously we always want to see managers outperforming their benchmarks. But for managers to take large positions in a stock like AMC Entertainment, which is growing based on almost no positive fundamentals, I think would be a little bit irresponsible. So this does create kind of some periods where we may see our managers underperform a bit, but it's not something that I'm concerned about long term. I don't know if anyone else's family are big fans of going to the movies. I think we've been to 2 or 3 movies since they reopened in our neighborhood, and I don't think we've seen more than 3 other people in the theater with us. So again, getting really excited about AMC Entertainment is something I struggle with right now. I think when you look at international markets on page 7, I think really the one area that stood out was kind of some of the differentiation that we saw within emerging markets. Down at the bottom there, EM Asia versus EM Latin America. I think what you did see this quarter was like Brazil being really a dominant performer in the emerging market category. Names like Petrobras, which is obviously tied to oil production. Names like Vale, which is a global metal and miner, really did well, really propelled that Latin American component of the emerging markets higher. Asian emerging markets were a little bit more mixed. I think a lot of that due to maybe some of the slower roll-up that we've seen in terms of the vaccines in Asia. And then skipping forward to page number 9, just looking at the quarterly performance for the bond market. As I mentioned, just as there was really no place to hide in the first quarter as interest rates climbed so dramatically, it was pretty hard not to make money in the bond market this quarter with interest rates declining about 30 basis points. Treasuries obviously produced a positive return. Corporates continue to outperform along with high yield. A lot of that due to kind of the investor demand for yield. Anytime you've got the 10-year treasury yielding all of 1.4, 1.5%, investors are going to seek that higher yield. And what that ended up creating was an environment where we've actually now seen corporate bonds at the tightest spread to treasuries that we've seen really since they gapped out in the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. So that enthusiasm for yield has really started to kind of price corporate bonds to perfection. And we're seeing our managers kind of start differentiating their portfolios a little bit because of some of their skepticism around the pricing of corporate bonds today. And then the last thing I would maybe just point out to you is on page 10. Not to try and get too into the weeds on this, but so the bottom right shows the treasury yield curve. And this quarter, what we saw was the yield curve move from the green line, which was March 31, to the yellow line, which was June 30. And what you saw was, not necessarily a ton of movement until you get out to about the 7-year window on the yield curve. From 7 years to 30 years, you saw pretty significant differentiation between the March to June yield curves. And so what that means is if you're a manager who has taken a lot of interest rate risk, pushed your portfolio way out on the maturity spectrum, you would have really captured a pretty substantial return.
Just to let you know, Ed Beenan has joined us.
So, and Ed, we're on page number 10 of the PDF. So this will be important when we start talking about kind of the structure of some of our bond manager portfolios in just a little bit. On page 12 of the report, we look at overall asset allocation. Right now, what I would say is when we look at our allocation, you see we're a little bit overweight to equities, a little bit underweight areas like non-core bonds, core real estate, and multi-asset investments. Again, a lot of this is going to be adjusted once we get our capital call in from IFM infrastructure. I'm hoping that we're going to see that in the fourth quarter. They recently got approval on a couple of deals that are moving forward with the fund. So the expectation is that we would likely see kind of those funds get called, but we don't know exactly when that's going to happen. Once we do, we'll just use that as the ability to kind of rebalance the portfolio, bring everything back in line with targets. But as we exit the second quarter of the year, we don't see any reason to take any active rebalancing steps within the portfolio. Important page as we near the end of our fiscal year is page 15. And the line really to focus on page 15 is the bottom line, the total retirement system cash flow summary. So you see, we started this new fiscal year at $122.5 million, outflows of around $2.6 million, fees and expenses of, pretty close to $440,000. But then when you think about return on investments, so where we're combining income and appreciation, you see we're almost at roughly $23 million in our return on investments. That brings us to $141 million if we close the books in June. On page 16, we'll translate those dollar returns into time-weighted returns across the top. And so, it's interesting, we talk a lot about this at the investment committee level. We're seeing great absolute returns, certainly returns well ahead of our assumption, but really the one area where we're lagging a bit is relative to that peer group. So you see that for the fiscal year to date, a little bit below median, we're at 17.6, well ahead of our policy, but about the 61st percentile in the peer group. Year to date, we're in the 94th percentile relative to that peer group. And a lot of this is just due to the fact that over the last couple of years, we have taken some risk out of the portfolio. You remember at one time, we were about 80% exposed to the equity market. When you factor in direct equities and LPs. That obviously would have set the stage for us to take a pretty dramatic hit in the first quarter of last year. And so what we've tried to do is take some of that equity risk out of the portfolio. That helped us weather the storm a little bit better in the first quarter of last year. But in this straight up bull market period, against this broad public fund universe, you're comparing yourself against plans that may be 75 to 80% in equity still. So obviously those are the plans that right now are kind of leading the way. Our goals have been to create a little bit more durable asset allocation. And I think like right now in July, we've seen a little bit more volatility. We're seeing more volatility in the month of August. And so for us, we don't just have to simply rely on the straight uptrending equity market. I think we're going to be a little bit better situated to withstand some of these choppier markets with the diversification that we've employed. In terms of kind of drivers, as you would expect in a bull market period, equities continue to really push the overall portfolio higher. You see our total equity up 30% for the fiscal year, up 6% for the most recent quarter. When you look at relative performance, domestic equities largely kind of kept up with our policy index. We've kind of seen some mixed returns, mixed relative performance out of our managers. You've seen Boston Partners kind of come back after a brief period of underperformance. A lot of that's just due to some individual stock selection, what they own, some technology names like Alphabet, what they didn't own, avoiding Disney. Disney obviously struggled a little bit this quarter with some questions about how durable their ability to reopen parks is going to be with a little bit of a rise here in the variant. Clearbridge is our manager within domestic equity that has been on watch. We placed them on watch last quarter. Our recommendation is going to be that this quarter we keep them on watch. They had actually gotten off to a pretty good start, outperforming in the tougher growth months of April and May. But then with this strong rebound that we saw, and again, those kind of mega cap growth stocks where they've historically been underweight, they did struggle a little bit. A couple of things that we're seeing out of them right now was that historically they had some pretty substantial deviations in their portfolio relative to the benchmark, meaning kind of significant over and underweights in different sectors. And what you started to actually see them do is kind of bring those sector bets in a little bit, less deviation from the benchmark, which should make things more reliant on their ability to pick stocks, not so much driven by where they're overweight or underweight. Now, that can work out to their benefit, assuming that they deliver on the stock selection, but it also could potentially indicate that they're getting a little bit more nervous about their ability to perform, getting a little bit more index-like. This is exactly why we put them on watch, a little bit more scrutiny on them. If we're not kind of seeing things turn around as we approach the end of calendar year 2021, we may have to kind of look at doing a peer review of them. But at this point, we're not recommending any action other than just maintaining them on the watch list. It's always a good thing when you look at ClearBridge on the right-hand side. The right problem to have as a trustee is a male who's only up 22% and their index is up 24%. So those are the good problems to have. Within the small and mid-cap portfolio, I would say this market continues to certainly reward more aggressive kind of growth-oriented managers. Jackson Square is continuing to demonstrate that. And it's been areas like healthcare, technology, and consumer names that are driving them higher. With Clarkson, I think it's really twofold. One, a little bit higher cash weighting. They're our manager who I would say is the worrier of the group, where they get very concerned about valuations. That's resulted in cash weighting kind of the low teens. But then on top of that, they really haven't chased like the mining stocks, haven't chased energy stocks, and they're a little bit under allocated to the regional banks, which benefited so much as interest rates started to rise. So nothing that I'm really concerned about with them. This has been a pretty typical pattern for them in a straight up market. They're going to generate some underperformance, but reliably, they're kind of always there to protect capital in a tougher market environment. And as you see, that kind of shows up on the right-hand side with that since inception performance. On page 17, when you look at our international, this continues to be an area of strength. This was an area we did a lot of work in terms of, we actually brought the exposure down a little bit over the last few years. We added a value manager alongside Invesco, which early on didn't necessarily pay off, but as we saw value come back to the forefront in the second half of 2020, Oakmark really kind of demonstrated its value add. You see on that fiscal year to date period now, which has admittedly been a much better period for value. Oakmark's the first percentile performance in that multi-cap core equity portfolio. This quarter, though, again, you kind of saw growth dominating international equities, just like we saw within the U.S. With Invesco, with some of their luxury goods, names like Hermes, Louis Vuitton, and then ASML, which is another Dutch company kind of tied into that semiconductor industry. Those were really the main drivers. And then I would say our emerging market manager is another one that's really continued to produce consistent performance. I think a lot of what they delivered this quarter was stock selection, especially in areas like Brazil where they're overweight. That was one of the big drivers of their near-term performance. Bonds have been certainly supported by the new addition that we made in the PIMCO Diversified Income Fund. Again, we took some equity risk out of the portfolio, took on a little bit of credit risk. So PIMCO's portfolio weighs to corporates, to high yield, to emerging market debt. Again, all these areas of the bond market that provide higher yields that have really been in demand by global investors. You see fiscal year to date, a 4% return out of PIMCO Diversified, supporting what was essentially a negative return environment for our core bond managers in Garcia and Richmond. I think the main thing that's differentiated between Richmond and Garcia has been kind of Garcia's permanent reluctance to take on interest rate risk within the portfolio. Their duration or their interest rate sensitivity is about 30% lower than the U.S. aggregate bond index. And then on top of that, they've also grown a little bit skeptical about prices in the corporate bond space, a little bit worried that there's not a lot of value there. So again, in this environment where interest rates were dropping during the quarter, where corporate bonds were outperforming, those were really just kind of two decisions that they made that worked against them. Again, as you look out over the longer term, these managers have worked together to add a lot of value over and above the benchmark. And again, I think these decisions that we're seeing out of Garcia, duration, sector position, that's exactly what we hired them for. Purposely, they look very different than Richmond. And we're seeing kind of that long-term benefit from them. Then on page 18, when we kind of look at our alternatives managers, really it's been great to see the recovery in real estate. Obviously, that was an area that we had some concerns about last year. I think everyone's still a little bit on the fence in terms of what's going to happen in the office market. And really, I would say when you look at Morgan Stanley's portfolio today, the drivers of its portfolio are its allocations in apartments, in industrial, and then in like the life science and even self-storage. Retail continues to kind of see some pretty weak market valuations on a quarter-over-quarter basis, and office valuations have essentially been flat. So what you're seeing with this fund though is obviously very broad diversification across the country, really kind of high trophy properties. These are ones that are going to go through ebbs and flows, but it's not like all of a sudden you're going to have these offices being totally abandoned just because of the amenities, the locations, and things like that. So very much a kind of a no nonsense type of strategy. What I would say when you look at this quarterly return, though, Morgan Stanley over the last year or two has purposely brought the leverage down in their portfolio, trying to take some of the risk out of their portfolio. And in the quarter where we saw heavy price appreciation, especially in apartments and industrial, not having as much leverage tied to that price appreciation kind of set them back from some of their peers. And then lastly, the BlackRock multi-asset income. This was another position that we added, a little bit of a go anywhere type fund that's really laser focused on the production of income. This quarter, they gave up a little bit of ground in a market driven again by those large cap growth stocks that aren't paying dividends in a core fixed income environment where we actually saw interest rates decrease. This portfolio again is really tied to dividend paying common stocks that work really well when value is outperformed, because a lot of those are value stocks. And then it also has kind of some active hedging strategies in place against rising interest rates. Again, that worked very well Q4 and Q1 as interest rates did increase, but with interest rates falling, that hurt them a little bit. So again, this was designed to kind of be a bit of a replacement for traditional fixed income, giving the manager more and more flexibility. And when you look at the yield on this BlackRock portfolio today, it's about 3.6%. That's more than double the yield on the core fixed income today. It's almost double the return of yield that we're getting out of the PIMCO diversified product. So again, our goal here was to kind of have that steady income stream, add some moderate price appreciation that would support the overall goals of the portfolio. I think we're continuing to get that. You see that since inception number, right at 7.6%. If you recall, kind of our goal with this fund was to earn roughly 5% plus CPI over time, and that's kind of in line with really where we are right now. Again, this page will see another addition once we get that capital call from IFM on the infrastructure side. Again, we're hoping that probably will take place latter part of 2021. Let me stop there and take a breath, see.
How much will the IFM contribute?
I'm not gonna say, I think we committed, I think that number was roughly $5 million. I can look at my notes.
I was thinking that was it, but I'm just not sure.
And the toughest thing there is, we made that commitment at roughly 5% of assets, probably close to 18 months ago now. We've had this kind of banner period of performance. So, again, that's always the hardest thing, whether it's real estate or whether it's infrastructure, these private funds that take a little time to draw down. It's always a little bit tricky to match up that commitment size. So as I said, really no new actions. Really the only thing on our agenda was to maintain the watch list status for ClearBridge within the portfolio.
Gary, this is your committee.
Yeah, John's been doing a wonderful job of keeping up the price of what's going on in the market. And I would agree with everything that he said based on obviously his experience. I think we're in a good position. I have the privilege of serving on the trustee board for the Best Employee Retirement, and they seem to follow the same kind of method and model that they were using. So, yeah, I would like to go ahead and make a motion on behalf of the committee to go ahead and approve the presentation, including the coverage on all budget.
Second.
Motion by Jerry to keep coverage on watch list, second by Nathan. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
I would say, this, Jenny, I would just touch on item 4C there. So this was something that previous executive director had kind of included, was kind of keeping our investment policy statement in front of you. We're not recommending any changes to the structure of the policy or the structure of the asset allocation. So, no action.
No action on the policy.
I do have a question on that. Do we know when's the last time we approved the policy?
If you have the policy in front of you, if you flip to the last page of the policy, we actually track kind of our approvals and the kind of the content changes back there. It's on the very last page of the policy.
It was about a year ago.
Yeah, it hadn't been that long ago.
No, I would guess, given COVID last year, it was probably in 2019.
And I mean, that's to speak to it, it's doing its job. We shouldn't be amending it every meeting. We should put it in place and kind of leave it and follow it. And then if something material does need to change, obviously take action. But I believe what John was, to further what he was saying, Kevin before thought it was always a good idea to have it as an agenda item in case something changed in the interim that we needed to address. But for the most part, an investment policy statement should serve a purpose and be pretty stagnant.
I agree. I was just saying, because I know that there are some policies where boards need to approve their investment policy on an annual basis, every twice a year or so on. Yep.
Thank you, John.
John, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's. Agenda item number 5. Jackson Walker is advised that due to ongoing special session, they recommend that we move the legislative update to the first regular meeting. In the state fiscal year 2022, Jackson Walker will provide the legislative update at that time. I mean, we're still in legislative session. Special session. Okay. Agenda item number 6. Non-appropriated 2021 budget update. Discuss and possible action. Shirley?
Good morning. We want to present the board with our most recent information regarding the expense of 2021.
That'll be under tab 6 of the board binders.
And this will show what we've either paid or what we have currently in purchase order voucher process. Pretty much, I think most of this is paid or paid from. We did have, during the year, we did increase the budget for Jackson Walker. We were anticipating needing their help for legislative session. We did have discussions about legislation at that time that added cost. We also were unsure about the time frame for a rural review. That we'll actually probably get to in the fall exam instead of this fiscal year. I wanted to point out, I guess at our last board meeting, we had a discussion about the need for some funding for some interim services during the departure of the CFO, and that's the last line item in the first section of the top. And it was an approval for $70,000. We've not spent any of that money. Whenever we started searching for audit, we had a discussion about audit. We thought we would have to seek an outside audit firm in order to conduct an audit. After some discussion with Judy Johnson, the previous CFO that was with us for an awful long time, she suggested that I reach out to the state auditor's office, and that they would have resources for us to conduct that audit. I did. Our contact that's signed through our agency there was actually Caesar Salazar. He the first auditor there, the state auditor's office, Lisa Collier. They actually conducted TESRS audits back several years ago before we had an outside audit firm doing our audit. So they were very delighted to come help. We're in that process now. Staff are being interviewed. We're providing documents. They're being very thorough. We're really pleased to have their assistance. I think that it will be a good thing for us as an agency and for the accounting process going forward. I believe that they told us their report may be to us in October, November, but that work is ongoing. With regard to the interim CFO services, I think that what really, in my opinion, pushed that to the side was because we had an awful lot of financial reporting and into state systems that had to be done. And for anyone that's not familiar with those systems, it's going to be a big learning curve. It's been a big learning curve enough for us and the staff that knows some of those systems. We're getting a lot of help from the comptroller's office and our allocation control officer. We're in contact with the LNG. We have assistance with some of the features of the statewide system on apps that has a lot of financial information and reports that we use with regard to expenditures and budgets. So I guess the good news about that particular line item in your budget is that unless there's something that's going to come up in the next couple of weeks, once we find someone that's willing to help us that knows those systems until we can get a new CFO on board that has experience with that. And I think that we'll that funding will actually not be needed at this time. Board training.
Shirley, I think Roger. I got a question. Maybe this is just for historical information, but you said that the state auditor in the past has always audited us. So what was the reason why we went to an external auditor? I mean, and is that still necessary?
Part of the reason why we talked about it is because this came down actually pretty darn quick. And our books needed to be looked at.
No, not the issue now. Why did we change from them before to an external auditor?
That could have, as long as we've been an agency, which is September 13, we've had outside audit.
Okay.
That's
That's what it was.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was my
And
question.
Jessica's our most tenured staff. Do you remember whenever whenever TESRS went to outside audit?
I think it was the executive director at the time during the change that wanted an outside view.
So was it from the commission,
Mhm.
whenever it became an agency, then we went to outside?
Correct.
In 2013, we went from a total government agency to an independent.
Gotcha.
And once we made that change, we decided to go with an independent auditor at that time. That's what,
Well, and I was only asking because there's obviously a cost difference in there. I mean, using the state auditor versus going to an outside.
Well, and the state auditor will also, like, in the committee, the board discussed, it will look at, over the last couple of years, because we've had the same auditor, they want to involve the audit, that audit firm as well in their audit.
Okay.
Because this is that, broad, look, at the financial operations and reporting over this last 2 years, for us to move forward, with knowing as much as we can and getting things straight and making the best decisions, not only with the account, with the numbers, but with the system and the management of that function. So, we're really looking forward to their results. They've been very thorough.
Sure.
And, our interviewing staff, and we're documents they request, we're uploading the secure portal that they provide. So it's been a good experience so far.
Sure, question in regards to that audit, when you reached out to them, is that the reason, well, in my case, I received an email stating that there would be an audit from the state auditor?
yes, you reached out to them.
You know, I understand, but is that what initiated them sending out, I guess, to all the board members, an email saying there's going to be an audit?
No funds.
As a board, they have to notify.
Yeah, that's what I
Yes,
was asking. Yeah,
That would be
okay.
good.
But I think they audited us before as
They
well.
they would do our annual audits before, whenever the commission, when it was firefighters pension commission. And then when that commission was sunset, in August of 13, then this became a state agency with an executive director as opposed to the commissioner appointed by the governor. So whenever we became a state agency with an executive director, that at the time that was when the transition, occurred to having an outside audit firm conduct the audit.
I understand that now, I was questioning it because it seemed like all of a sudden they just popped up and said, we're going to do an audit of TESRS. So this explains why I got that email.
It was, yes, and it was at our request, and they were,
Courtney, did you have a question? Okay.
okay, we had, the other expense, we wanted to note that the TESRS expense has not yet been entered into that payment system, I guess. So we wanted to make a note that this is not the final accounting for 21. We can write that at the first meeting after September 1st, whenever everything has paid. The title says cash basis, but it's really more. Some of these expense totals are really what's been income. Not much. It's very small, but I wanted to make that clear.
And this is all the non-appropriated.
This is board contractors and expenses that are paid with board funds as opposed to general revenue funds from the state.
Does anybody have any questions for sure about the non-appropriated funds? Okay. Let's move on to agenda item number 7. That would be the non-appropriated 22 budget adoption. Shirley?
This is your budget for special fiscal year 2022. In the past, during the summer, you would, the board would receive a chart that shows your expenditures through the year and propose, based on those expenditures, what the beginning budgets will be in the upcoming state fiscal year. Most of the, part of the reason why Red Wisdom's proposed budget for 22 is less, is that this is not a year, they're not going to be performing an actuarial evaluation. That'll occur next year. That'll be next, in the next budget. So we will, and as y'all know, whenever, as we go through the year and the expenses, we start looking at expenses and future work, then we'll come to the board if we need to start, if we need to increase any of these proposed budgets for 22. We did add for this year the line item for the CFO salary supplement. I really believe that's going to make a huge difference. I think I have 2 candidates that I'm interviewing. I'm going to take one interview this afternoon, and I do think that that's made a really big difference in the candidates that I'm looking
For the record shows Stephanie Wagner has joined the board. Thank you.
Question on, and I understand, from the actuary before, the difference in cost between the proposed budget and 2021, but I see that there's a $50,000 difference between Jackson Walker. Was that also reduced? I just didn't recall that.
We added, we added 50 to Jackson Walker earlier in the year.
Periodically, we will increase the contract by $25,000. So over the last biennium, we did it twice and ended up at $100,000. But we generally start off at 50 and then as needed.
That's what, okay, thank you.
As certain things come up, need their assistance.
Shirley, maybe what you can do is show it the adopted budget and the amended budget, and that way you can see that there was a line item increase.
Yes, we could do that. That'll help.
Do we know what the cost has been for Jackson Walker over the last 3 or 4 years?
With Jackson Walker?
Instead of going back and amending the budget to add numbers, we're spending $75, $25,000 a year. Maybe start with that number for 50.
Shannon, is there a dollar amount in the contract when we initially go forward with them?
All our
outside
counsel contracts have to be approved by the Attorney General's office. And so when we make our request to retain them, we can request an amount, and they take that into consideration when they decide to approve or deny our request. And then adding it is a simple amendment to the contract.
I understand that. I'm saying if on average we're spending 75, I'm just paying 75,000. That's the number. But if we're spending $75,000, I think it would make sense to start the budget at 75,000, knowing that we're going to spend that historically.
No, this is for just 22, so we do spend about 50 a year, and when we make the request to the OAG, it's for a biennium. So I think we're at about 89,000 for the biennium. So if you cut that in half, it's about 50 per calendar year, fiscal year. Oh, you're welcome.
I know that we still have a line item for our medical review board. We have a few disability cases that we've had for a long time. Sometimes there may be a need for that to be reviewed by a medical board. Medical board services, as small as we are, there's not a need for us to have a medical review board at all, but that line item is there in order to have funding for, if something comes up that we need that review, that we have some money to go out and find a provider for that.
But we don't have somebody on retainer.
No, not,
And this was brought up several years ago that we have some temporary disabilities that maybe they need to move to permanent disability. And that's what the review board, or permanent disability is not necessarily permanent, it needs to end. We just need a review board. The money's there if we need it, so far we haven't had to have it.
But you had said that we had a few disabilities that have been there for a little while. I mean, this is something that we probably should address and
I
try to
think
have.
that in previous, those have occurred a long time ago.
Mhm.
And so in terms of that continuing disability,
Okay.
it's kind of been taken care of.
Let's take care of it.
Or,
I
so
think we have 2 or 3, maybe.
But they're already done and continued. That's what I want to make sure I do.
that if we had some new occurrence and
Correct.
that we needed to follow that process with a new occurrence, and then we would have to know where we want.
And you have some potential providers or whatever to reach out to?
There's,
or no?
there are contractors that will do that for you, but they're not.
You just got to
Expensive.
Right.
We would see if we could use medical review board services that some of the bigger retirement systems have. And piggyback on their, not necessarily their contract, but on their, I don't know that we've ever looked with the state of Texas, if there's somebody that's registered more than 5 days. But I just think it's good that, it's always good to have it in the budget, because you never know what's going to happen, and we may need to bring that in at some point.
Absolutely.
Do you have any more questions with regard to the 2022 budget?
Should I have a question on the 2022 budget? You're proposing 423,000, more or less. 423,265, different.
Mm-hmm.
But yet on the fiscal year 2021 budget, you have 501,000, but your prior slide showed 592. There's a difference. The month of August, you showed 592 budget 2021. And you're showing 2022 that fiscal year 2021 was 501. So $91,000 difference more or less.
Part of that is because we don't have GRS, but GRS was a 2021 line item for the actuarial audit. That is, GRS performed the audit of the actual evaluation that's performed by revenue. So that's a $35,000. That's a $35,000 line item that's not in the 2022 budget.
We're still missing 65 though.
In that 592, you have that interim audit that you had here recently, so that might help us in with the amended budget, like we was saying.
We don't have $70,000 line item or.
Because that would have been amended, and then that would be used for college or might have both those together.
We can reproduce these 2 charts and send them to you. Or look at them at the next board meeting. and explain some of that difference between the 21.
I'm sure that you can explain that, just, to me, the numbers, they pop and they don't match up.
Yeah, and it's just the budgeted 2021 budget versus, and 2022 has nothing to do with it, but it's the upper portion just needs to be reconciled. You have it categorized differently in both. Yeah, so that's sure it is the,
Categorized, yeah, you don't have the internal audit or the GIS. And I think that would make up the
I
difference.
think too.
You mean, yeah, for 22?
No, for 20, we're only 21.
You've got 21 budgeted, and you've got it laid out on agenda item 6, on agenda item 5. See what I have my numbers right?
Yeah,
Yeah, on 6, you've got everything laid out. On 7, you've left out GRS and the internal audit for what was budgeted.
For what was budgeted?
Yes, and that makes up the $100,000.
We'll go back and
Yeah, right.
and reproduce the 22 budget and to better reflect the 21. I mean, the proposed 22 wouldn't change.
Any more questions for Shirley? Can I get a motion for the board to adopt fiscal year 2022 non-appropriated budget as presented or amended today, an amount not to exceed $123,265?
I'll second.
Motion by Matt Blake, seconded by Jerry Romero. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Shirley? Agenda item number, do we need to take a small break?
Yes, please.
You want to think about it for a minute? All right, let's take a short 10-minute break. Everybody has that coffee, it's been about an hour. Time is 9:29. Still no email. Still no email. I'm good, how are you doing?
Welcome to Austin, man.
For the time being.
So you said that you worked out, you're working out.
yeah, I'm very fortunate with that. But,
Not to live
huh?
there. Not to live there.
Yeah, I'm actually born there, but, northern states out there. So I just travel, well, when I can.
Yeah.
We were traveling and now that's kind of a whole thing.
It isn't fun traveling.
Yeah.
Not right now.
No, I was so excited about it. So I usually go, I used to go every month, but going for it. So that's it. Probably, everything. You know, when you work on a lot of time, you get your pay done at the same time.
I covered half the state, everything from Amarillo down to Corpus Christi, everything that was rural and border communities was all on my. Yeah.
Are they?
I have no idea. I retired from the bank.
Oh, you did, okay.
So
Yeah.
I know that they were scheduled to go back to in-office production in September, but they did not move that back in November. So I thought they'll be back at all this year.
Yeah, we were going back and then Austin, Austin. It's a small.
In your case, in my case, it's good.
Yes. I'm sorry?
In your case, and in my case, what we do is something we can do without having to go on the.
Yeah, I just have to travel. That's the only thing.
Thank you. Wait. So different, and very fortunate. You know, we're gonna tag you as part of the HR, so
Some look at some of the shows that he would do like.
No.
I mean, just the big all these two cities.
I was driving in, and then it's getting better, like, you know, we're all frustrated, but like, I was surprised. But it used to be right out of our.
Yes. I target
And just. And
all
then,
of the younger.
and I. Right. Okay, he's got he's awesome. He's awesome. I have to play up the track. Yeah. Sorry. Literally, we're fortunate. Oh, we have to do, we're back to in-person meetings. Well, then we're more like that in-person meetings. I think that's physical. And we'll discuss it in. Yeah, for sure. Usually share. Yeah, I thought they were all for it, and then I was like, trying to get back to that schedule. And as we do that, we'll be. Yeah, I understand. We're not doing the virtual. Yeah, but even love this already coming 2 hours. Yeah, no, I can do it. Yes. I have to work. I know, I'm looking down because it's the.
Well, most agencies have done like that, but it's supposed to be more frequently.
Yeah. Well, you can just knock something out in a couple hours, you know, and.
All available online.
Yeah. And then as we move forward, and things we need to that are non-reduction board. The agenda. I understand. So when's your start date?
Monday. I mean, break all.
Really?
They have something like really quick.
Yeah.
That was one word.
So I might go back to I'm sorry, but I can get out of order. Yeah, it'd be fun.
So you'll actually be a state agency.
Oh, yeah, it'll be in one of the, of my class. I won't work.
You just go all.
But. But I think that's more.
How's life in Florida?
Okay, okay, no complaints. Still golfing, yeah, my son.
Yeah. Where will you be off?
High school golf, freshman.
Freshman, hour. Okay.
So he actually won the trial, right? And then they had their first qualifier. He was playing great the first week, the second week, and then this week, he'll play terror. Two of the three rounds. So yesterday, had that getting 5 and the quarter. And he missed it. So,
It's so stressful. We had when my son was Xavier in the war pharmacy, and then we had. Yeah. Honestly, yeah. Yeah. Medical board. Use a lot of my service rights and something was fun. And then went back to drink. Got there. And there was a lot of pressure to go to the state. And they too soon. However, my tradition is a key plays first 9 balls today. One is that slow, whatever, whatever. You know, yeah. A little bit, you know. Yeah. But your son's starting, well, he's probably started. I don't want to. So who are you gonna send this? This is
Started out. Trying to take our spot. So they were.
I'm just gonna say,
Yeah, no problem.
Right.
I think it's good.
So. This is.
Focus time.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
means
it's-
maybe other. That's what we want to achieve.
Yeah.
It's by the legislature. Until you get.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, you got our confirmation, you got our proof of reserve. Can we just?
No.
Still zoom in person, 30 miles away from where they're
I can send it to now, why can't I send it? They should be able to. What time is it? 9:45? And how long were they on? So if we've got, do they plan on coming in about 2:30? We can just. Maybe a little earlier, yeah, he'll be after my presentation. Depending on when we come back, I mean, if she wants to get started.
No, video.
Okay, it's 9:46. Went a little bit longer before break than I thought, so it is. I will accept that. Thank you. Next time I'll just say 15 and we'll be good. Agenda item number 7. Shirley Hayes, if you would continue on with your executive director's report.
Okay. I'll be giving you the system administration and system activity report. We have staff had just recently completed some work on a project about annual reporting. We'll also look at the pension system activities, the numbers that let you on what's been happening with enrollment. I can update you on what's happening with staff and our budgeting and reporting, financial reporting for this year and next year, and on the CFO position. And then a little bit about our recruiting and technical assistance. At the last meeting, we had public comment from Roland Persley from Edinburgh about the determination of qualified service for members for 2020, where he was concerned that the department had given all members qualified service for 2020, and the board had done that because of COVID. The ability of personnel to respond, people under quarantine. There were a lot of factors I think that they considered, but as a board, they just made the decision to give all members qualified service. His concern was that qualified service is defined as 25% of emergencies are under board policy. How that is determined, how the emergency is determined. The intent of the policy was to allow a board to have give everyone a fair shot at earning their service. If people work away from home, away from town, if they're doing shift work, if they're offshore, then it would give the board some latitude to have a policy about how to determine 25% of what constitutes an emergency for their calculation. This more or less was a board policy decision at the time, and we felt like I think that there's some concern about that whole issue of departments that award qualified service for all members, and is there any concern about that? Do we need to look at what records they keep in order to determine their calls, their 25%, with the number of staff we have, and travel limitations, that kind of monitoring can get pretty intense, pretty working to it. So, but we still wanted to look and make some comparison between 2019 and 2020. We knew that there's some departments that have historically given everyone qualified service. It's a determination by the board. They award the service at a board meeting and sign off on it. We have no reason to generally to question whether or not any of those members met or did not meet the calculation. But we just wanted to know how many departments give all of their members qualified service every year. So we've collected the information, looked at their history, and the reporting, all that information in total in our database system, it's not static. Who's got, because sometimes qualified service is corrected. They will, someone will either bring it up to the chief. It will come up a lot of times when people are getting ready to retire and they see their service history and they have a question about it. But those kinds of, and we have retroactive enrollment where new members come in that were not on the annual report. But we do have For the most part, the information that is in our system electronically as the annual report that's been reported, where it was submitted, that was a pretty good snapshot. So we wanted to compare those 2 years and see if there's a higher number in 2020 for any reason. Would that have been COVID? Would it have been maybe a reluctance to, maybe it was because everybody was busy in COVID and everybody was helping out and they were responding? We have no, we just don't really have an idea other than just looking at the numbers and going from there. Once we did have the work done, we need to now do a little bit of a review for both years, compare the 2 years, and see if it was higher in 20, and then see if there's the departments that have a pattern of awarding qualified service to everyone, and if we want to more or less do a desk review, give them a call, ask them about how do you calculate your service, what records do you keep. We understand the concern with this is that the more of our members, we all want our members to earn qualified service, but historically, when you look back at actuarial evaluations, there's always that measurement of all of the population that's in our system, all of the members in our system. And while some departments may award qualified service to all of their members, and as far as we know, that's perfectly justified. We have no reason to doubt it. But whenever you have that occurrence where a board made a decision to give everyone qualified service, that is outside the norm. So now we're with the issue around how that may increase liability to the system. That our liability is increased for every year of an award. It adds toward retirement. It adds after 15 years. It adds to the benefit, increases the amount of benefit. So we wanted to start with this review. Maybe have some conversations with some departments. Have a discussion with our actuary because we would have it's that incremental slight variation that if the department had, the department did this with regard to COVID, and this gave it to everybody, that, well, yes, mathematically, there would be a very small, not it would impact that in a very, very small way, but on a broader scale, to do this kind of review and have that kind of discussion, I think it's a good idea. I think it's another step in our work with our departments and our local boards about their roles and responsibilities and about calculation of qualified service, how the board, the rural form board having a policy around qualified service, what that's for and what it means, and we'll go from there. This is just a very small, that initial step in this process.
Sure, I have a question about that. Is there a standard that all boards must meet as far as awarding qualified service?
It's based on the information that they will receive from the chief. The chief will keep records about training and about who's responding to calls. Some departments, when you look at the denominator in determining the 25%, if someone got 25%, they may exclude certain types of calls, like false alarms. Because you have a department just running out of, 3,000 calls a year. And it's going to be kind of hard for anybody to be 25%. But when you start looking at the calls, or looking at when calls occur, when is someone available to respond? Somebody that works offshore, might be gone 2 or 3 weeks, and then they're home 2 or 3 weeks. They may leave in the morning at 6 a.m. and come back at 6 p.m. But when they're home, they're there, they respond, you know, they're certainly, in terms of the availability, that they would respond to 25% or more of the calls that you know, that they can't, whether they're here to respond.
So, I mean, so a follow to that, is there a standard, is there a state standard that all boards must follow that says this is the absolute minimum that you can use to award?
It's 25% on, you know, 20 hours of annual training. This is an annual measure. And 25% annual of calls. Then you take, when you look at our emergency events, when you look at that emergencies, and that's been in, you know, that's been in our statute.
It's kind of ambiguous.
Sure. I don't understand this.
I'm brand new to this. So-
Okay, let me explain a little bit for you. Try to clear it up for you. We have over 200 fire departments in this system. My fire department, my constitution and bylaws in my fire department, my training minimums to stay in the department exceed TESRS. That's just one of over 200 fire departments in our system. The 25% is a real, we should depend on the local boards to allow them to determine what the 25% is. Because of the 200 fire departments we have some that you're going to make 25% or you're out. We have others that, well, we have all these different scenarios out there, probably over 200 scenarios. Combination paid departments, we only count what you respond to at night. We take out EMS calls because you're only a fireman. There's all these different variations. So it's a slippery slope to get into what she's talking about, in my opinion, that we should empower as we do now. Local board, you submit us the information that you deem qualified.
I guess what I was trying to get at is that there's a standard that has to be followed by everybody, minimum
No.
standard.
Minimum standard is,
25.
minimum standard is 25% of calls,
Emergency.
emergencies. What his department deems an emergency, and what my department deems as an emergency, and the 200 other departments, what they deem.
So I understand what Shirley's trying to say, but globally, we know everybody in this system. We plan for everybody in the system making credit. Is that accurate?
We want to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
So if we're planning, and financially especially, that everybody will make credit and everybody will, we're gold.
So
But it impacts, this is where it impacts,
The actual.
the actual evaluation of the liability. But what the bigger point here is to remember that actual evaluations of the system have occurred, you know, every 2 years for a long, long time. And when you look at our population of our active members, you look at how many people stay in 2 or 3 years and then they're gone. They're not vested. They're never going to vest. We have an awful lot of unvested terminators. Now, there were contributions paid on their behalf for
Those 3 or 4 months.
less than 10 years. But there, a lot of them are in that 3 and 4 and 5 year category. So that.
I'm sorry. But to that point, when you talk about, there's a lot of, folks that don't stay the amount of time. But if you have an individual in a department that does nothing, does not train, does not respond, and they still give that person credit, that is not
That's
right.
right. No.
And unfortunately, there's different scenarios. And I'm not saying that is occurring, I'm just saying that that's probably what we should make sure is not occurring.
Right.
In the sense, I mean,
Versus
I
the other
totally
side.
agree that, hey,
Yeah.
A person that is legitimately trying to make their training, make their responses. And, they come in short on the percentages, but when they look at it, they work these times or whatever. But that's exactly how we've done it in the past is we make sure that, hey, why is it that person's not attending? And you come up, hey, he wasn't available. Or she, So I think it's the folks that, if those individuals are out there, those are the individuals that are causing the problems in the system, in my opinion.
So that was my second question. Does the trust have any enforcement power?
Not,
No,
it's a responsibility of the local board to certify, these papers are sent into the office, these papers are certified that said all 30 of my firefighters qualify. You know, and it's a yes or no question. The board signs on it. If there is some serious discrepancy or somebody brings it to our attention that this, what the gentleman, correct me if I'm wrong, the gentleman that spoke last board meeting said, I think there are people that are doing this, and I think it's going to affect our actuarial evaluation. Thank you, we will look into it. If somebody comes in and says, Seabrook has got 40 people on their rolls, and I know there are only 4 people show up for every fire, same 4 people. Do we need to look into that? Probably would require a phone call to ask if they can justify it. It's on them. You know, that's.
We've never argued.
I got one.
Yes, I have.
I've got one caveat to that, Jerry, just to let you know, because I was on my local pension board for a while. You have one city official, you have 2 citizens. That's mandated by us, and how we educate them, the local boards, and that might come back onto us a little bit on educating them every couple of years, because they're going to train, people come and go on board. But for us, we allow them flexibility, and it's to the department of, we want to wax the truck on Saturday or come up with fire prevention, we'll give you. They have
You're still an
videos
integral
that
member of this
for us, for our standpoint, and it could. But the chief's the one that's presenting this, or the training officer is the one that's presenting this to the board. It's ultimately the board. And if they're pencil whipping it to a board that's non-existent, that can be problematic, but that's not all that we're looking for is it's been presented by the board, the local board.
The local board is aware of the rules, but it is ambiguous, 25% of emergency. We don't consider, some departments do not consider fire alarms an emergency. Other departments live for fire alarms because they
That's
don't.
what makes their noise.
That is the reason they're firefighters, they'll go to any call that's any call.
Well, to that point too, though, part of this is recruitment and retention.
Absolutely.
And if you don't count those points, you don't know it's an emergency, it's determined it's not.
True.
And if the system came in and said it was a fire alarm, you best be sending everything you need to send to it, and determine otherwise. And if you don't have the people showing up for that and not counting that and anything else, then that's a problem too down the road. I mean, it's an emergency to us until we do otherwise. And I understand the systems are problematic, but because that gets people like, oh, I don't have to get up for that. It's just like EMS calls, and granted, they might be first responder or they might have an EMR level, but they roll over in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning because they don't want to get there and they don't have any people show up. So it is a retention program as well. And it's intended to keep people here. And it's very lucrative to keep people here. I think it's a great selling point, but it's hard if we
So you said we've actually done audits before, so when something comes up, I think that's the power we have. Is, hey, we'd like, this department showing a pattern of something, we'd like to see your records.
Well,
I think
and I don't think that when Shirley has done audits in the past, that it's not, oh, we got a problem.
Sure.
I know it was one of those, we're gonna pull 5 departments and we're gonna audit them.
So the more you pull on this string, I mean, it puts us in a bad position because it impacts the trust's ability to pay for these benefits down the road. But aren't they paying dues
No,
or not?
no, okay, that's
Wait,
one of
wait,
the, it's one of the caveats. For this,
Sorry, keep on going.
okay, for this pension system, every pension system has got 3 legs to it, okay? You have the employer, the employee, and the investments for the fund. We are taking care of the investments. The city is the employee. The state is the employer. So me as a firefighter, nothing comes out of my pocket, nothing. But I draw a pension now because the state is taking care of it. So like he said earlier, it is a improvement and retention for volunteer firefighters.
Somebody pays that contribution, which is usually the sponsoring.
The city entity.
The entity.
The city entity is paying for the employees.
The entity, up to 25% from the state,
Which is represented on the local board.
1/3
or
contribution.
1/3 contribution.
Shirley, I think you're gonna find that 2020 is gonna be an anomaly.
Absolutely.
Because there were no rules, everybody, all departments, my department, I know, we struggled on, when
Who
that.
can come?
Yeah, who can come, when you can come, why you should come, and the rules changed every day, the numbers got worse, we got stricter, they laxed, we got, we eased up, and so it was a learning experience for us in 2020. And so I think number one, you're gonna find some anomaly. But I think the identifier is that if you see a department that consistently gives 100% credit to all its members, that's the red flag right there. And I know my department, I can speak for my 2 departments, and we had members that didn't, even though we threw calls out and we were a little more lax because of COVID, there were still members that didn't make credit because they just didn't have they didn't even show up, they didn't have the numbers. So I think that would be your first indicator. If they show a pattern beyond 2020, prior or after, then I think that's a red flag.
Well, I think that was honestly, this is that first step in just taking a look at that as a historical record, because we've never looked. We will look each year like, oh, look, everybody got credit, that's great. But nothing in terms of any kind of looking for any kind of pattern. And in terms of enforcement, it's really, for us, has always been a matter of education and re-education. With the chief, with the members, letting the member know, you can get credit in the system and get your benefit, and we'll show them a chart with regard to how much money, even if now $36 a month for 15 years, and it's a lifetime benefit. You'll get over $100,000 in your lifetime. So educating the member, a lot of our work has been, sometimes it's been more top down, but I really think educating our members, educating the chiefs, educating the local boards on their duties and their responsibilities under the rules, under our statute, is a really big piece of that. We're working on and struggling a little bit to get a better training plan together that we can. COVID, we're not traveling, we're not visiting departments, we're not going to department meetings like we did prior to COVID, and which that's the best way to get to know our departments and our members, train them on the system, let them know about the benefits. Even benefits. It's I've been to departments that they'll talk about somebody that got hurt a year ago, and they're not aware that there's a disability. So that keeping that information on our website, Scott's working with Adobe Spark to have some little short videos that we can post on our website, that we can have available in the library on the website, about benefits, about local board meetings. I mean, we've got a lot of work that we can come up with some good clips that anybody can access and learn a little more about how this works.
Now, before COVID, Scott was on a roll. And then, you got your feet cut out from under you because of COVID.
Scott went to how many, 60 departments, 8 months. Yeah. And it's that, face to face. I went to a lot of departments since I started, and learned a lot. And every department's different. Everybody was always glad that we showed up. And that's, so it's education.
Well, I mean, too, I think to Laura's point, I mean, 2020 is gonna be an anomaly, but I think with the expertise on this board, you could probably come up with a template checklist to kind of give staff an opportunity to, when they have an interaction with departments, and if they're clicking off on some of the checklists, maybe that should trigger an audit at some point in time.
That's what I had in mind for, I want our benefit specialists, we've got two that are new. Vicky's been with us since January, and Rebecca's been around, is I think her second one. So she, and both of them are doing really well. But having a communication plan for our benefit specialists to, if you're not heard from somebody in 3 months, just call them. Call your departments, how's it going? Is there anything you need? Looking at your enrollment, just that, having that conversation.
Looking at, because of the gentleman that spoke at last meeting, and that you're going forward with this and identifying potential problems. Yes, 2020 is going to be an anomaly. 21 is probably going to be somewhat of an anomaly because we don't have to wear a mask. We're not shutting down. However, but continuing on with this, I appreciate the work that you and everybody else put into this.
Yes,
I'm sorry. So one thing, totally agree with that, 2020, but I mean, so I understand this is in place then, you'll do this each year, and you can see if there are departments that are reporting out. And I think that's great, because then we'll know that, and we'll have that document, and obviously that information will be available to the actuary for their experience studies and everything else, correct?
Well, it's kind of built into their study scheme.
But I understand, but I mean, they'll have that true data to know it's
And
not
I
just
think
a
it's,
guess.
I do think that it's that it is an indicator that this department
Right.
Needs a little technical assistance.
Absolutely.
And it really does, I mean, it really does matter to reach out and get to know the department. Because there can be some that they've only got 10 people, and all 10 people showing up,
Absolutely, and here's the other half of that point there, and I don't know if you guys have already done this or not, but where all of our departments are throughout the state of Texas. Obviously they're in clusters in different areas, but when you have a county as an example, and you have 2 or 3 departments in that county, they meet on a regular basis. So if they don't have the information otherwise, they learn from the other department. And so it would be good to know if these issues are occurring in one part of the state to the other to help drive our education to one part of the state or the other. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so I think that's important as you go forward, just to make sure that, because we cluster all together, I guarantee you, and it's like, oh, hey, what do you do? Instead of calling the state office, a lot of people like they just call their neighbor, hey, what do you guys do? How do you do that? And we share stuff all the time, so I think that's a very important thing on the education piece. And I like what you guys are doing in education. I think it's great, and I think it needs to be more of it, because I think a lot of people they're apt to that. It's like, hey, this will cover them all, and that is really not the case of it. It does have to have a important piece.
Right, well, a lot of our education is triggered by annual reporting.
Yes.
Now we need to intend for us to start earlier this fall. I'm not going to wait till November or December to start talking to people about annual reporting and getting their local board together. I've started a lot of work with, I don't know, about a dozen departments and found not only helping them get their board back up, it's a lot of work on the phone, a lot of phone calls, a lot of Zoom meetings, and and also finding out that we need to enroll. We had one department up in Panhandle that the chief had walked off 2 years ago, and wasn't going to help them with anything, and she called and told me that. I think we're supposed to have a board or something, and, they were just, got kind of and wasn't interested in helping them at the time. I don't know, yeah, I guess, but anyway, you know, the chief was willing, the city manager was willing, Scott, worked with them very closely, it was a lot of work. They retroactively enrolled a bunch of people, they got the board together, the board knew what they were doing. So there are those success stories that a small department, but good mentors. And I was really glad that all the hours that Scott put into that paid off. And all of the hours that city manager and chief did. So there's good things that can come from it. But I want to, yes, we need to start keeping this kind of information as a way to guide some of our contacts, our phone calls, going out and seeing people. So we'll be keeping on today with this one. And I will let Mr. Person know that we started on a project, and I do think I'll agree with Pilar. I do think 20 is going to be an anomaly for a lot of reasons, and probably 21 is going to have its own. It'll have its own.
Yeah.
You know, this is information I've always wanted to know, so since I don't know it, I'm going to share it with y'all because I think it's important to know. It's important to know that, you know, that we're gradually increasing the amount of benefits paid. This is money that we get money from the state of Texas through our legislative appropriation process every 2 years. The money we're going to get from the state for this biennium is less than 1/3 of our contributions. The way that statute reads, it's up to 1/3 to ensure an actuarial sound pension system. Well, our last actuarial evaluation was a 30-year amortization of income and liability. So I don't know if that played a part. We tried to, you know, we asked for the full 1/3 in an exceptional item that we would receive. And at the same time, as you can see, this gradual increase in the benefits paid. You also see a gradual increase, obviously, in the number of unduplicated paid. A gradual increase in average increase in average benefit. I think it's for me, it's good to know this information. It would be, it's good to know if some of you had a little bit of an increase in the number of active members. An active member is a contribution to the system. If our state dollars are going to be fewer, then our local contributions need to be greater. And that can come from new members, it can come from new departments. And, so there, I mean, that's why we have a recruiting strategy. And yes, I think that the pandemic has, has slowed a little bit. I mean, everybody that calls us and that reaches out to us, Scott does a really good job of engaging them, and they're interested. I think they're waiting. You know, they've got the information. They're still interested. They'll call them back. But I think that the pandemic, I think the city ESD budgets perhaps play a part. But we kind of have a lot of people I think in the waiting room to figure out what they want to do. Some of the increase in the active members, I do think is coming from our current membership and our current departments who are actually taking a look at their enrollment and realizing that, oh yeah, we need to go back and enroll some people. And they can terminate some people that move away. So I think that's really good. You can see that our applications process is kind of waning. We had a campaign that Kevin started which we need to, we'll pick that back up at the first part of next year, of this next fiscal year, to reach out to our vested terminated jobs that are age 55 and older. And we start with the older group first. And we were sending them a benefit statement and an application in the mail. I don't know how many hundreds we sent out. We used to send out postcards to vested terminated, which is less expensive than sending them the letter, but I think getting them the application in their hand and the benefit statement may have made a difference. And, so I think that's why that last batch went out in the spring. So I think that's why that fell in.
Sure, I have a question. Can you explain to me what, I understand active members, what's unduplicated payee?
An unduplicated payee, we have some payees, some retirees that they also were a volunteer and retired, but their spouse was a volunteer. And so they were both retired, and then the spouse passed away, and that spouse is entitled to a benefit. Jessica, am I explaining that correctly?
Do you have a payee with different ledger accounts, whether they're the firefighter plus receiving a survivor benefit plus receiving maybe a non-death duty benefit, and they're all receiving different amounts for the different ledger accounts? Instead of counting 3 ledgers, we just want to know how many times this person gets paid a check. Just that's the one instead of the ledgers versus things.
And so we like to just consider the days to completion. That's we track. We have a little database that we use. It's working really well. To when an application comes in, Eliana Martinez will review that, be sure everything's complete. If there's we ask for a copy of the driver's license because we want to be sure that we're paying the benefits to the right person. And we have that way we have current identifying number, current mailing address, an accurate birth date to determine if they're eligible. And if it's not complete, she doesn't put it in the loop, the process. But once it's there, all these documents can reside within that database as PDFs. She'll pass it on to me. I review it. I pass it on to the benefit specialist. And so that process from the time it's complete and entered into the database until we actually get their process approved. I don't know if they've gone into their application approved or they've gone into first payment yet. But taking around a month is, and because we're doing that internally. I think a couple of sessions ago, we changed the rule because applications used to have to be approved by the local board. And so sometimes there could be 4 and 5 or 6 months before an application was certified by a local board. If the member has no issues, no questions about the qualified service, they agree with everything that we've got in our system, which is the vast majority of our applications, then we can process. They don't have anything to complain to the local board about, So that has really made a difference from the time someone applies to the time into the first check. So that's another reason. I just think that this is a good way to translate how our system is, how the pulse of our system, the money, the people, and then how are we going to provide for it, how quickly we can get something out of it. Y'all have any questions about anything? But it's, I think it's going to be interesting to watch that trend. This chart is a representation of transactions by the department's online users. It doesn't include forms that may come in the mail or come on the fax machine. But because this information actually comes out of our database, this is what this really tells you is that you can see how annual report time, January, February, the number of entries, re-entries, terminations, I mean, everybody's busy, getting their roster correct for annual reporting. And you'll see it again, in August. You'll start seeing, because it's MRR, you know, they received their MRR, which is their kind of their pre-bill for what we're gonna bill them, at the end of the month. So make changes, terminate somebody that's moved away. You don't want to pay for somebody that's moved away. Enroll people that need to be enrolled. And you can see there's a lot, you know, there's a lot of terminations. And all. So this is just a way to see what's happening online with our with the data entry. I think the other thing is to know that you know since the first of the year. There's been 600 transactions that have come through the database, come through online. So we know that there are, you know, that online users, and they have access, they're processing enrollment and terminations in the system. And I just think it's good. It's just numbers that tell me what our department online users are using the system for. And it indicates those busy times of the year for us with annual reporting and MRRs. The other thing that I think is now this is again just our transactions online, the number of terminations versus the number of so which is another thing to keep in mind that they're terminating a lot more than they're enrolling, and that all boils down to contributions.
And do you have a difference on the termination of the age limit of those, or the age of those individuals? So are some being terminated, getting close to retirement, some are being terminated at very young age?
The terminations, they're obviously the number of applications that we process. And the last number was 16.
Okay.
So some of those terminations were audits or the terminations of people at the time.
Right.
But no, there's not any other than just these counts. We can get the counts out of the system.
Yeah. I was just curious because I know we always lose a lot of the younger folks. You know, they don't stay on that long. You guys know that, but
but it's still just that general. Like that snapshot,
sure.
General snapshot. It's just, you know, I mean, not to make any mathematical correlation there. Just like, you know, there's a lot more people that they're from
Okay.
and it does. It boils down to reduction in our contributions. Going back again to how that impacts our overall valuation.
Does the system, the online system, when they terminate, does it have something in there to say why they terminated? And I only say this from like in Rotary, I've been to deal with Rotary, and when we terminate a member, we have like a list of 10 things why they left. Did they move? Did they, you know, whatever, right?
That goes back to the chief and.
Well, no, because the TOA is our system, right? I mean, so that's what I'm saying from a programming aspect of it. If that answer was there, they have to answer the question.
We can.
I just don't know.
And programming, you know, there's not a lot of work with contractors. Things that really need fixing.
Right.
But those kind of enhancements are good. And that's good. And I think it's a suggestion.
It might not be possible, but I think it's.
Well, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, right.
Process. And then to say, well, does it indicate that whole issue around people sticking around 3 or 4 years and kind of leaving? And we always are asked, well, can you get his money? You know, and it's
Well,
we're not.
That's not guys that even know why they're terminating. That's
Well, you could do a voluntary resignation or, you know, at least give you an idea. Maybe.
well, yeah, just a simple question like that.
I mean, I think it's all about information, but I mean, whether we know, at some point, that information is discussed here or discussed in your studies and stuff to figure out, hey, what can we do to improve our system, right? I mean, our ultimate goal is to put more people in the system and make the system flourish, right? And so, I think stuff like that helps that, you know.
That give you an indication whether people are moving on their own accord, or the other one would be they're not making the numbers, 75%,
That's right.
or it was another issue like the secondary.
But it helps with the decision making, the education, everything. Yeah, but it might not be working. I mean,
We'll see,
depending on the cost.
depending on. It's a good one. With regard to the budgeting and reporting that's going on for the end of 21 and beginning of 22, we had some obviously some critical things that we needed to be sure happened. Being so small and having all of these functions siloed in a CFO position, pretty much, and you kind of, there's reasons to have certain functions with one staff person to do some work and then the function to approve that work or release that work with another person in span control. And we've done everything we know to do to be sure that we had that, all of the right permissions to the systems, even with help from those who helped me to get those rights. We have managed to do our staff payroll for July and August, which is the biggest part of our general revenue budget, I thought. And so even though we've documented our process clearly on how we've been able to do this, and without that span of control in place, because we have that person that's gone, then we've had to. Shayna's worked with that. It's a long process for that to happen, but I've really appreciated her ability and her willingness to do it. And like I said, we've documented everything that we've done to help us in any kind of audit later on. We are with Eliana's help. We're managing and Cassandra with purchase orders. We're managing the process purchase orders, pay vendors, pay contractors, or investment managers. The systems are very detailed and they require, like I said, a lot of clearance in order to make that happen. But we finally figured it out and we made it happen. I wanted to talk to y'all briefly again about House Bill 2 that passed in regular session. House Bill 2 is the kind of a companion to the Senate Bill 1, which is the Appropriations Act. And the House Bill 2 took the 5% reduction that the governor called for last summer, 5% of everybody, and more or less wrote into law that 5% reduction to say, to detail how much of general revenue or any dedicated funds were to be returned to the state. And House Bill 2 speaks to unencumbered general revenue and general revenue dedicated. In looking at that in May, I guess in May, whenever our CFO was here, I was assured that it was kind of it was more or less taken care of, or it was something that wasn't going to require an action on our part. There was it's a $34,000 return of general revenue, which is in our operating budget for our staff and our operations agency. And there was about $133,000 return of GR dedicated funds. Okay, our GR dedicated line item, our GR dedicated funds that are given, that are deposited in the treasury every September. the state has chosen to take those funds from the volunteer fire department assistance fund. And in the government code for that fund, there's an item there that says the state may use that fund to satisfy its 1/3 contribution, references the statute for that 1/3 contribution. And that's where we received the money from. And that's where the state has chosen to give it to us from. So that's historically been what it is. We get that money, it's a contribution to the system, it goes into treasury, it goes into trust. We spend that money, we saw our payrolls over $600,000. We get 1.3 million. Well, it's pretty much gone, in September and October. It's paid to persistent benefits. We also collect our contributions from our departments. They go into the treasury. We use those to pay persistent benefits. As you know, as a board, sometime during the year, mid-year, 2/3 of the way through, our payments have outpaced our revenue, and we have to come to our investments and take a drawdown from our earnings in order to continue paying benefits. I think that scenario is probably common in every retirement system. But their revenue at some point is not going to be sufficient to pay their liabilities on a monthly basis. When I was contacted by the comptroller's office and I had a conversation with our LBV analyst about this, especially about the GRW and its contribution to the trust. It's money that's spent. We don't have any money left. It's gone. It's gone by the end of October. That House Bill 2 specifies unencumbered GRW funds. I basically have said we don't have 133,000 given. And the bigger piece of this is the contribution made to this fund to the trust is in our plan status, a qualified plan status with the Internal Revenue Code. I've talked to Chuck and Elisa about it when this was coming up because I wanted their guidance about this. Like a department that contributes, or a city that contributes to our system, we can't return. You can't return contributions to the system. They're much more adept at crafting that language, and obviously they should be. And we depend on them to do that for us, and to define those appropriate statutes and discuss our plan status. They're going to respond to me hopefully today, so I can get back with the LBV analyst about this issue about returning the funds. Their question is that we have at the time of the LAR, we have $127 million fund, so we just return money from our trust fund. And that's where Chuck and Elisa, as our plan status attorneys, will come in to discuss how our qualified plan, what issues that might present for us to return money from the fund and from the trust with regard to our plan status. And so I'll let you know how that turns out. I understand the purpose of House Bill 2 to return those unencumbered funds. We are exceptionally unique, I think, in this regard. A lot of dedicated funds go to find a position at an agency or a project at an agency, and it's budgeted over a 12-month or 24-month, whatever cycle, because it's a dedicated fund for a particular purpose. I know that fund pays for a lot of the grants for departments for equipment. It's you know, it comes from money through, I think through insurance, our insurance payments for fire protection. That's where that fund receives its money. But the way that particular, way that statute is part of that fund does let the state know you can take the money from this fund to satisfy your one thing. So, we're gonna work with Chuck and Elisa. I'll respond if we need to have a conference call. Chuck and Elisa are more than willing to, they brought it up, if we need to have a conference call about this issue and any issues that may pose with our landscape, then we'll go to the next.
So the unencumbered amount is not the full amount that they paid 1/3. You're saying it was like 27?
Well, there was just a number in the bill. I
That's
don't
what I'm
know
saying, how
where-
did they come up with it?
I
Okay,
think it was the reduction. We asked for a waiver or
Yeah.
an exemption because other, public retirement systems receive state funding. Where their state funding was exempt, our state funding was not.
so with regards to the assistance fund, so I just want to make a comment to this, and this kind of goes with that, and it kind of hit me at the state conference for this in May in Loving. The legislator, our lobbyist lady, was up, and he made a comment. He made a comment to the fact that that money, that 1.6 or whatever that comes to this fund, to make it solvent, it was all in a negative way, as in the sense of that money's coming out of there, it should be, used elsewhere, when the statute specifically says that the state's responsible to bring that up. It's not something that the fund, it's always been in there. So it didn't sit real well with me at all, and it kind of made it a bad light in my mind for everybody sitting in the room as far as, what this fund's all about. Those monies that are in that fund, they go to all kinds of things. You're absolutely right, but this is all about providing fire protection. I mean, if you look at it, recruitment and retention, it's providing fire protection. And, whether the state decides to do that or not, that's up to them.
Yeah.
But I really think, and hopefully Chuck and Lisa can definitely work some angles with it, because it certainly, I think there's some real negativity on this May side in this exact issue. And that might be, I don't know if you can experience that with anybody from that board or not now, but.
Part of the problem with them was nobody really even thought about looking at them for additional funds to plug in for pension. We didn't bring it up, somebody else brought it up.
Absolutely.
And their fear was, well, if TESRS can pull into it, and they can pull into it, and we've got 360 million, how long is that gonna last?
I understand that, yeah.
So,
I'm just saying, it really put a kind of a punch to, I'm like, I didn't say anything there, but it was like, if I called them in the corner, I was gonna ask a question. So I said, where do you go?
Well, and I think that's where even, I read the statute for that fund. And that last item said the state may use money from this fund to satisfy our, and it references our statute, the state.
Yeah.
It's not, so the state has chosen, that's where they're gonna get the money from to give us our 1/3.
that's a small issue. The big issue is if the state wants to take 132,000 from that one fund and 34 from our general revenue fund. We don't want them to do that because we are such a lean organization anyway. We're gonna do everything we can to keep from having that happen. But in the bottom line is we may have to eat $160,000.
Well, my general
That
revenue,
is actually wrong.
I was relieved with the general revenue side, because I think when I get here, it's taken care of, is the general revenue. I mean, when we look at, when I've been looking at spreadsheets that, the CFI and I were using to try to project expenditures through, through August for the agency. It was really tight.
Just for 34.
But when I talked with our CPA, with our appropriations control officer, they were taking the number from the LAR, which was a much. So where I was squeezing down every dime I could, thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to have to give them back $34,000. And this was this week. Once you have to know where you start from. Obviously, you don't know how much you have left. And we were operating on a much leaner, I would say that now, a much leaner dollar figure than the appropriation of our GR. Well, yes, there's $34,000. That's not going to be a problem. And we will still have money here in the next couple of weeks to take care of some things that I can really. So that's kind of the general revenue piece is not a problem. But I did find that we need to, and it goes again to education, to educating our our legislators, our people at the LBB and the CPA that help us. They've all been very helpful. And very respectful with regard to the issue. And I will say they've been very sympathetic and empathetic with our plight, having 8 people and coming down to the end of the year like this. But that how we receive and use our GR dedicated funds to a trust, I really believe is kind of unique to us. Because it's not something that we budget. It's not something that it comes into the strategy for operating a sound pension system, which is where the agency money is in GR. So it looks like we have an operating budget that's inflated by 1.2 million. But no, that's I've explained this many times, but I know they need the legal statute, they need some references with regard to our plan status and, our qualified plan with the revenue code, and Chuck and Elise are going to work on that for us and help us through reconciling what's required of us in house. And I will keep Jamie informed and I'll let everybody know how it turns out. Dave, anything you need that you feel like we need to know with regard to House Bill 2?
No.
No.
There it is.
We can get it. Okay, there we go. We're doing all we can.
Yeah.
The other piece is, I mentioned our state accounting systems. We have asked, we're getting some assistance with our appropriations control officer on getting some stuff done that has to happen in one system. CAP's financial system is where we track budgets, we track purchases. There's a lot of, for anyone familiar with accounting, there's a lot of object codes and fund codes and on how that stuff is tracked and it's tracked for the state, with budgetary purposes. So we have asked for assistance with that particular system. We asked for some assistance with regard to our payroll, to our staff payroll, sort of this rollover thing for the next year. That worked out. That was a phone call that was, really took a lot of pressure off of us in terms of, because we didn't know what that was. So that kind of assistance, sometimes something that really seems pretty daunting, turns out to be okay, and we can get through it. We chip away at it, literally, we chip away at it every day. I think I've talked to some of you about our CFO position. We had 4 applicants. Actually, they were all really good applicants. There were 2 candidates that had state agency experience in these financial systems. I guess that my experience in the last month or so with these systems has really, I've really honed in on how valuable that experience is and how it can be such an asset to you with regard to the projections. And even moving forward into the next LAR. Because that work needs to start now. We'll be working on that LAR next summer. And so I'm really looking forward to having a CFO that can take on the whole. I think it's, you know, we have general revenue that operates our agency. We have money that comes into the trust fund. We have a cash account with trust where we pay our benefits. Having a CFO that can have more interactions with our investors, keeping in touch with John about what he's seeing with trends and about our things we need to know about in our upcoming meetings. Watching our investment managers, watching how their fees are assessed, the invoices that we receive from them. I think that's. I think there's two good candidates. Interviewed one yesterday. An interview I thought lasted an hour. It lasted 3. I considered that a good sign. We had another interview with someone else on Monday, and I hope that's a decision after that. Hopefully, we can get someone on board. I don't know if we get someone on board about the first, but should be shortly. And I'm really looking forward to that. Recruiting technical assistants. I know that we're talking about. I guess at breakfast talking about safety. That their convention's coming up in Fort Worth. That we're going to be there. So I'll be there if I can. I'm going to try to be there. It's always a good conference for us because ESG commissioners, those that are in our system, we get to meet them, and we've always had some really good conversations and some interest come out of safety. We've talked about, Scott and I talked about the municipal league. I talked with Laura. We were talking at breakfast about the Texas Municipal League. And they do have, you mentioned they have the large city and the mid-city kind of track. And I think that, you know, I'd like to see us go. I think it's, you know, I mentioned like a banner that says, do you know a volunteer firefighter? I don't care if you're from Dallas or Houston or Amarillo or, you know, Fredericksburg. But everybody knows a volunteer firefighter. I don't care how large the city, and I think having a presence there is you know, I think it would, we can, I don't know that we've been to their state convention before, and I think if we gave it a shot and see how we did, I think that might be the thing. The Texas Fire Marshal's convention is in San Marcos in November. We've been to that one before. I think it's another one of those opportunities to showcase what we can do for volunteer fire departments and recruiting. Crosby has been in our system. I want to say that's Harris County ESP 80. They've been on our system in a couple of weeks. They'll have been in 5 years. Their time frame to do the purchase prior service will expire.
When will that expire? When will their prior service request expire?
They have until the end of the month. I'll have to look at the contract. End of August, and Tom's been talking to him. He's given them the information. He's either the end of this month or the end of September, because they enroll their first. Their first enrollees are October 1st. So I think they have to be in September. But you know, they seemed interested when they wanted the information to see what they could do to go forward. Ovilla, fire department called me, requesting information about revocation. Because their volunteers don't stick around, they're there a year or two, and then they got to get a paid job. At the time I was talking to him, I looked up Ovilla in the Fire Connect, and saw that they had 35 part-time, part-paid. And so I asked, and I said, are they paid by the city? And he said, yes. And I said, do they stick around? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, your part-paid can be in our system. They're paid by your city, they can be in our system. They're paid by the ESD, they can be in our system. If they're not, and they're not in municipal. And he said, no, because they're part paid and they keep them at whatever the benchmark is, the 1,000 hours a year or but they're not eligible to be in the system, but they are paid. So hopefully that instead of a revocation, we'll actually get 35 new members out of it. That would be marvelous. He wanted to know the cost, what would be the cost of revocation and the cost of enrolling in the program. So we'll get back with him either tomorrow or Monday. I'll get back with him about those numbers. So he can take it to the city and see what the city wants to do. Scott met with Silverton up in the Panhandle. They were very interested. I think Scott, you mentioned that a lot of some of the folks in Silverton, they're older folks, been in the department a long time. He's met or talking on the phone with Beach City, and maybe we were mentioning Beach City being nearby. They needed to talk to somebody about being in the system. We wanted to give them a shout. That would be great. Because they also were talking about coming in the system, and they were given information about the buyback, right?
Yes.
They know the cost. So, and those buyback costs, we run them so many different ways. Do you want them all at $36? Do you want them at $50? Bigger buyback at 36 and come in at a rate that's 50. I mean, how do you want to, we'll need to tweak that buyback estimate any way you want to. Don't have any questions?
I have one quick comment, maybe it's just a thought. Something maybe to consider, when we talk about education and maybe kind of building a little bit on the partnership stuff. I don't know if at the SFMA executive board meetings, with their executive board, if you guys have ever done a presentation. But I say that because those individuals along there this year, the president he's in TESRS, and at least one more of the vice presidents is part of the TESRS system. A lot of the times through the years, those members have not been part of it. So they certainly don't have the same thought processes, I guess you might say, to it. But maybe that might help with some building some partnership with them as far as to talk to. There's a lot of members, and that's where most of them are at. And I just don't know if you guys have ever tried to get on this board meetings when they do that.
I know I haven't. I'd be more than glad to. And I think that it's I do think that there's a lot about our system. And this is and I think the reason to go, they kind of go out of the box with other municipal.
Sure. Because
there's around 1,800 volunteer departments in Texas. I mean, if any business has room to grow, we're there. I know that with the pandemic, the things that are happening nowadays, some folks are just going to be but still, we do have an opportunity. We did have a big
well, and I sort of appreciate that. Maybe that'll spark some discussion on that. Maybe something to think about or talk to Tim. You know, if that's something that you guys do. I think it would be beneficial. I'll hear it from the other side, from the other, but I still, I just.
You know, I do think that there's I do think there's a lot of disinformation with regard to
Yes.
the fund, to the DRW fund.
Yes.
I don't think that, I know I don't care, I don't think I'll care where that one person, if the state wants to give those general revenue dollars to the GR dedicated in order to satisfy that 1/3 of our statute, which is part of the 1/3 contribution. And I mean, you know, we'll spend it either way. And we'll spend it in 2 months.
Okay, any more questions for Shirley? Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Scott, Jessica, Sandra, Dana, and those that are watching. We appreciate you. At this time, let's take about a 15-minute break. Huh? Sorry about time. For the agenda. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. We're gonna have lunch at 12. Okay. 20 minutes for the closed session. And we've been sitting here for over an hour and a half and the bladders are full. So we're gonna go ahead and take a break at 11:03, 15 minutes, get back, and then we will take care of closed session.
I'm sorry. Once you get through the closed session, that's a pretty good opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm actually in Austin for now. I didn't know Orlando.
Are you serious?
Exactly. Very frustrating.
So I'm ready for that.
Is that right? Yeah. It's just. Yes, I had yesterday. Tomorrow. Which is actually kind of the same market you guys really hired system, or hospital systems. So, yeah, we've had pre-finals and then the on-site visits, final, so this has been about a 4 or 5 month process. Hopefully it works out the right way.
Yeah. Okay, well, welcome to Poston, and remember, they see about, instead of calls.
Sound good?
If I really want to see if I can, the board can help, help type the position, and because there's, I think a lot of work that the CFO needs to do, keeping up with our, cash, with investment review.
Sure.
Was it right on there?
I was horrible.
It was.
Yeah, but they're
And,
playing.
you know, maybe more so than,
All right, you guys have a good rest of your day. Yes, ma'am.
I went to,
Great to see you this evening.
I flew to Oregon in early August, and I had the same problem. We got delayed in Denver for 6 hours, so we had like a 7-hour. It was so bad.
That was here last month. I think it was at 2 in the morning, and out at the airport at 5.
Now, did you get a direct flight?
No.
I thought they had expanded some of their direct flights.
They have pesos for some reason. It's in the penalty box of Southwest.
I knew Southwest was coming. So I thought they were bringing some of their direct flights back.
Going back, I have a direct flight at 2:55, which is great from home, but if you're coming here to visit, you can't fly in at 2:55. You know that.
Right?
No, you took that.
It is what it is.
Is that right for Dallas?
Dallas.
Oh.
Phoenix.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were.
No.
Okay.
You know,
I'm sure everybody's out.
yeah, I'll this one.
Square.
I can't remember you. Y'all had flown somewhere and you fly back, took you to Vegas.
Amarillo to Vegas to Austin.
Oh, man.
Or Amarillo, my other option was Amarillo to Denver.
You have to say you should be doing the best.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but planes can go to Vegas. I don't know that I'm gonna, I don't know that I'm like that. I'll stay on board.
People that are in good mood going to Vegas, or?
It stays like that. I'm really like dogs. And
Went to Virginia. It was good, it was a great flight.
It's Kate Miller, guy.
Went back, so that was the first time my wife told me, I remember right, for the Washington. It worked out. She was step out the window, it's on. Do that.
me and my daughter and my grandson were supposed to go to Omaha. My best friend, her daughter lives in Omaha. And we have 3 boys, and it's a great house, great. And
18, all 18.
No problem at all.
it was right whenever, and my daughter was. She's highly and,
Yeah.
and one of my grandchildren, she's had surgery a year ago, and some more. Doesn't stop her from going to see her daughter, but at the same time, it was that. It was and my grandson was 15, and now he had his first run. He started high school, and then big on high school here. Didn't have to go. I know,
you know.
people getting stark crazy.
Yeah.
You know, getting a little stark
It
crazy.
is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to think, she not even, I mean, we would, there are a couple of minutes. We've done a Wind Star, or we've done a Lake Charles. We've been debated. And,
Yeah. Oh. I got a couple others.
I mean, after, I didn't really pick that, but let's be here.
You're gonna like this, my front cheek in the face, right? He puts his, so he wears his big uniform every day, and his tie is always something. So he has it all the time, so it's like his signature, you know.
I have to think of something. I'm up for it.
are y'all freezing?
Yeah, he's, no go to the Asian. Terrible.
I'm not right, doesn't mean I don't know. I'm like, okay, and do that, so we're gonna do one, and then one.
Yes.
Yeah. And then,
Is lunch over or is it time going back?
We're gonna do denim and then we're gonna do, closed session. Thank you, Rob.
That ain't what I meant.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, let me. Okay, now you can do this. Okay, it's 7:15. At this, we're back in session. Agenda item number 9, we're gonna go into closed session for cybersecurity consulting, security briefing, vendor risk assessment by Denham Group. Time is 11:15, and the session will go into closed session to discuss agenda item 9, Texas Government Code Section 551.089. System will discuss cybersecurity measures associated with the system's electronic information and technology system, and performance evaluation procedures for the executive director. The closed session agenda item number 10 will be rescheduled to the first regular meeting of the board after April 22nd, when the executive director has been in position for 4 years. At the end of the closed session, we will reconvene in open session. Shirley, Jessica, and Shayna, and Dave. Anybody else? Good. So who do we have for cybersecurity?
Appreciate all your little advice and steering this in the right direction.
Courtney can't hear. Can you hear us now, Courtney?
Yeah, I think someone just unmuted the computer. Now I can hear you.
I'm getting a recap. Dave is leading us.
Jenny,
Yes.
there was a big delay with how we're working this now, because I wanted to make some comments, but it just seemed that either you didn't hear them or we had some technical issue. So we need to look into this after the meeting.
We need to look into what, sir?
We need to look into it. It's not working well, at least on my end.
But there's a delay, said you wanted to make comment and couldn't.
Okay, I tell you what, we will get with Scott on that. I believe that's his bailiwick, him and Jessica, and see what we can do with that.
All right.
Sorry, were the comments for closed session or for regular session?
Well, for regular session, when we were talking about the pension boards, and then on the closed section, I never got the email, or they sent me an email, but no one told me I sent it. And guys, I get so many emails. It was so buried in my list. So we just need to do a better job of this.
We'll work on those issues. Okay, so for the recap, Courtney, I don't know if you and Ed heard, but Dave is leaving us for.
Oh.
He's leaving us for the Public Utilities Commission. You can call him and ask him to dinner, fish, whatever you want to do. Just if your lights go out, call somebody else. I think that was a question.
Well, best of luck to you, David. We will miss you.
Appreciate that, thanks.
Okay, having said that, lunch is ready, so what I would propose that we go into, not closed session,
Recess.
go into recess. I knew the word was there. We'll go into recess, have lunch, and then we will come back and finish up. Recess at 11:43.
Roughly what time?
It's usually about 30-45 minutes. Because it's here.
I think the issue,
What a set of time.
yeah, I think that's
So, you know,
45 minutes.
About 30-45 minutes. 30,
How about?
how about 45 minutes? If we get done quicker, we're better.
12:30.
So yeah, 12:30. Okay.
Hey, we can just sell, so we can text you if we're starting. I have Courtney's.
It's okay. I'm gonna leave my computer on, so I'll hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank y'all.
Ed, are you with us? Ed? Can't hear you.
Yeah. Yes, I'm with you.
Oh, my
Just a sign. It's got to be signed. Can you get a cell phone for Ed? You can see where- If you can, I'll find it. This meeting takes, we need to let them know that we're starting.
Make it stand there. You go on here.
Good luck to you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I ended up all of the. I gotta run, I gotta do this.